How the economic machine works, the mechanical view. The economy often feels complex and unpredictable, but if you strip it down, it actually works like a simple machine. It is caused by a few simple parts and a lot of simple transactions that are repeated over and over again, a zillion times. These transactions are driven by human nature, and together they create the three main forces that drive the economy. 1. Productivity growth. 2. The short-term debt cycle. 3. The long-term debt cycle. To understand why the economy moves the way it does, we just need to look at these three forces and how they interact. Let's start with the building block of the economic machine, the transactions. An economy is simply the sum of all the transactions that create it. A transaction is simple. A buyer gives money or credit to a seller in exchange for goods, services, or financial assets. Here is the most important formula to remember. Total spending divided by total quantity sold equals the price. All economic cycles and forces are driven by this simple math. If you increase total spending without increasing the quantity of goods sold, prices go up. The biggest component of this spending isn't cash, it's credit. In the US, for example, the total amount of credit is roughly $50 trillion, while total money is only about $3 trillion. Credit is the most volatile part of the machine. When you buy something on credit, you are creating spending. And because one person's spending is another person's income, this drives the economy forward. When someone earns more, lenders are more willing to lend to them, which creates a self-reinforcing cycle of borrowing, spending, and earning. Productivity versus debt. In the long run, how much you earn depends on how much you produce. As we accumulate knowledge and work hard, we raise our living standards. This is productivity growth. Productivity matters most in the long run, but credit matters most in the short run. This is because productivity growth doesn't fluctuate much. It's a steady line upward. It doesn't create economic booms and busts. Debt does. Debt allows us to consume more than we produce when we acquire it, but forces us to consume less than we produce when we pay it back. This swing creates two major cycles, one that takes 5 to 8 years and one that takes 75 to 100 years. The first major force is the short-term debt cycle. This typically lasts 5 to 8 years and happens over and over again. Here is exactly how it works. As economic activity picks up, we see an expansion. Spending increases. But remember, most of this spending is fueled by credit, which can be created instantly out of thin air. When the amount of spending and income grows faster than the production of goods, prices rise. We call this inflation. Now, inflation can be dangerous, so the central bank steps in. When they see prices rising too fast, they raise interest rates. This is the brake pedal. With higher interest rates, two things happen. 1. Fewer people can afford to borrow money. 2. The cost of existing debts rises. Think about your monthly payments. They go up. Because people are paying more on their debt, they have less cash to spend on other things. Spending slows down. And since one person's spending is another person's income, incomes drop across the board. When people spend less, prices go down. This is deflation. Economic activity decreases and we get a recession. If the recession becomes too severe and inflation is no longer a problem, the central bank will lower interest rates to encourage borrowing again. This reignites the expansion. It's a simple mechanical process. Expansion, inflation, recession, deflation. But there is a catch. Over decades, these short-term cycles add up to something bigger, the long-term debt cycle. Why? Because human nature plays a trick on us. At the end of every short-term cycle, the economy finishes with more growth than the previous cycle, but also with more debt. People push the limits. They have an inclination to borrow and spend more rather than pay back debt. Because of this, over long periods of time, debts rise faster than incomes. We call this ratio the debt burden. Despite this rising debt, lenders keep lending money freely. Why? Because everyone thinks things are going great. They are looking at the recent past. Incomes are rising. Asset values are skyrocketing. The stock market is roaring. It feels like a boom, but it's actually a bubble. People are borrowing huge amounts of money to buy assets as investments, which causes prices to rise even higher. People feel wealthy, so they stay creditworthy even with piles of debt. But this cannot continue forever. Eventually, the debt burden becomes too large. This takes roughly 75 to 100 years. At some point, debt repayments start growing faster than incomes, forcing people to cut back on spending. And the reverse cycle begins. Since one person's spending is another person's income, incomes begin to fall. This makes people less creditworthy, causing borrowing to go down. The cycle reverses. This is the peak. This happened in Japan in 1989 and in the US in 1929 and 2008. The economy now enters a deleveraging. In a deleveraging, people cut spending, incomes fall, credit disappears, asset prices drop, banks get squeezed, and the stock market crashes. It's a vicious spiral. You might think, why can't the central bank just lower interest rates like they do in a recession? They can't. In a deleveraging, interest rates are already at zero. The traditional tools stop working. The lenders realize that the amount of debt is too big to ever be fully paid back. Borrowers are squeezed. The whole economy becomes uncreditworthy. So, policymakers are forced to use 4 distinct levers to try and save the economy. Lever 1, austerity. People, businesses, and governments cut their spending to pay down debt. This sounds responsible, but it creates a problem. Because one man's spending is another man's income. When everyone cuts spending, incomes fall faster than debts are repaid. The debt burden actually gets worse, not better. Lever 2, debt restructuring. As people default, banks get nervous. Depositors rush to withdraw their money because they fear the bank will run out of cash. To stop the collapse, debts are restructured. Lenders agree to get paid less or get paid over a longer time. This is better than nothing, but it makes asset values disappear, which makes people feel poorer. Lever 3, wealth redistribution. The government is now in trouble. It is collecting fewer taxes because incomes are down, but it needs to spend more to help the unemployed and provide stimulus. The budget deficit explodes. To fund this, the government raises taxes on the wealthy to facilitate a transfer of wealth from the haves to the have-nots. This often leads to social tension. Fourth lever, when austerity and debt reduction aren't enough, policymakers are forced to use the fourth lever, printing money. People think money is fixed, but the central bank can create it out of thin air to buy government bonds. This allows the central government to run a deficit and spend on stimulus. The balance. This cooperation leads to a beautiful deleveraging. It is a delicate balancing act. Policymakers must balance the deflationary pain of cutting spending with the inflationary spark of printing money. If they print just enough to replace the credit that disappeared, incomes can grow faster than the interest on the debt. If they print too much, you get hyperinflation. Print too little and the depression deepens. But when balanced correctly, growth returns. Reflation. Slowly, creditworthiness restores and we enter the reflation phase, though this recovery can often take a lost decade to feel normal again. The 3 rules. To navigate this machine yourself, follow 3 simple rules. First, don't have debt rise faster than income, or the burden will eventually crush you. Second, don't have income rise faster than productivity, or you will become uncompetitive. Third, do all that you can to raise your productivity, because in the long run, that is what matters most.